have with us today, as we celebrate Kwanzaa here at the Africa Unbound Museum for the very first time, the creator of Kwanzaa himself. Dr. Maulana Karenga is with us, and I am deeply honored, sir, that you took this time. I know you're very, very busy around this time of the year. Everybody wants to talk to you, but you're taking time to speak with us, and I am deeply grateful. Welcome to the Africa Unbound Museum virtually.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it, Dr. Kasahun. My name is Dr. Maulana Karenga. I am professor and chair of the Department of Africana Studies at California State University, Long Beach, USA. I'm also the creator of Kwanzaa, a Pan-African holiday that celebrates family, community, and culture. And I'm the author of the definitive text on Kwanzaa called Kwanzaa, a celebration of family, community, and culture. And I'm the author of many scholarly articles and many books, including Ma'at, the Moral Idea in Ancient Egypt, a study in classical African ethics, Odu Ifa, the Ethical Teachings, Introduction to Black Studies. And I'm currently working on work by a definitive text on Malcolm X called The Liberation Ethics of Malcolm X, Critical Consciousness, Moral Grounding, and Transformative Struggle.
I just read your message, the 2020 message, Kwanzaa message that you published on your website. Very, very powerful. And I would like to just kind of focus on a few points there, and for us to discuss. I'd like to read just a couple of sentences, and then I'll get into my question. So you say in your message, in your 2020 Kwanzaa message, you say, Kwanzaa's origin are both ancient and modern, and both sources serve to urge us to constantly strive and struggle to be ourselves and free ourselves, to live good lives and to bring forth the best of what it means to be African and human as both personal and social practice. Please elaborate.
Yes, one of the main reasons I created Kwanzaa was to reaffirm our rootedness in African culture, because we had been lifted out of our culture by the Holocaust of enslavement and made a footnote and forgotten casualty in Europe's history and culture. And so, as Amilcar Cabral, one of our great revolutionary leaders, said in the 60s, that our struggle is to return to our own history. And we wanted to return to our own history and culture so we could speak our own special cultural truth and make our own unique contribution to the forward flow of human history. How we reconceive and reconstruct the world. That's what we wanted to do as young people that are deeply involved in the struggle. Secondly, I created Kwanzaa to give us a time when we could come together as African people all over the world and reaffirm the bonds between us, right? And to celebrate our sacred self, to celebrate our culture, and to meditate on the awesome meaning of being African in the world. What does it mean to be the fathers and mothers of humanity and of human civilization? What does it mean to be the authors and heirs of our reaffirmation of our African selves and our liberation tradition in the 60s? What does it mean to be sons and daughters of the Holocaust of enslavement, survivors of colonialism and imperialism? What does it mean? This is a time when, more than any other time in the world, African people all over the world, on every continent in the world, come together and do just that, reaffirm their rootedness in African culture, speak the common language of our culture, right, which is varied and diverse, but nevertheless has certain fundamental values, like to speak truth and to do justice, to honor our elders and our ancestors, to cherish and challenge our children, to care for the poor and the vulnerable among us, to have a rightful relationship with the environment, and to constantly struggle against evil, injustice, and oppression, and to always raise up praise and pursue the good. And so we meditate on that, and we do it in a way we don't do for any other holiday. This Pan-African holiday is just a fundamental anchoring ground for us as African people. And the third reason I created Kwanzaa was to introduce and reaffirm the importance of community and African values, values that stress and strengthen family, community, and culture. And of course, the hub and hinge on which the whole holiday turns, or the Nguzo Saba, the seven principles, which are first in Swahili and then in English, umoja, unity, kujichagulia, self-determination, ujima, collective work and responsibility, ujamaa, cooperative economic, nia, purpose, kuumba, creativity, and imani, faith. And so those are the values, these community values that stress and strengthen our togetherness, right? And our beautifulness as African people, our sacredness as African people. One of the most important things I think I have contributed in addition to Kwanzaa is the revival of the intellectual discussion of Egypt as a source of the moral idea of ancient Egypt, of Africa. That is to say, using Africa as our moral and social idea. And I don't mean any one country. I mean the best of what it means to be African and human in the fullest sense, to lift that up. And so, for example, how many people know that Africans introduced the concept of human dignity, which is indispensable to any concept of human rights, right? And dignity, called shepesu in ancient Egyptian, it is defined as, that inherent worthiness that is defined by three basic characteristics. Number one, it's transcendent of all social and biological characteristics. That is race, class, gender, sexuality, sex, religion, age, ability, nationality. We have this in us regardless. Second, it is equal in all people. No one has more dignity than the other, inherent worthiness, right? And third, it is inalienable. Nobody can take it from you and you can't give it away. So what I want to do when we talk about to be ourselves, we're talking about rooting ourselves in the best of our culture. And I need to define culture because sometimes people think of culture as song and dance, right? That's part of it. But when I talk about culture, I'm talking about a comprehensive process. It is the totality of thought and practice by which a people creates itself, celebrates, sustains, and develops itself, and introduces itself to history and humanity. And it does that in seven basic areas. In the area of religion or spirituality and ethics, history, social organization, economic organization, political organization, creative production, which is your art, your music, your literature, and then finally ethos, the collective psychology that we achieve as a result of practice on the other six areas.
Good. So another point that I would like to for us to have a discussion about from your message, you said Kwanzaa was conceived and developed in the Black freedom movement and was understood as part and parcel of the twofold struggle to be ourselves and free ourselves.
Yes.
It was a struggle to be Black, to be African, and to be free from domination, deprivation, and degradation, and to be free to live good, meaningful lives, bring good in the world, and come into the fullness of ourselves. That's a beautifully crafted sentence, and I would be grateful if we can talk more about it, more specifically about being free to live good, meaningful lives, bring good in the world, and come into the fullness of ourselves.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
Yes. And so, again, let's take the first that we are struggling on two fronts, to be ourselves and to free ourselves. And we can't be ourselves we can't fully be ourselves unless we fully free ourselves. So we try to struggle to be ourselves, to come into consciousness of ourselves. In the 60s, during the Black Freedom Movement, and when I say the Black Freedom Movement, talking in the Pan-African sense, you know, that's the time not only for the African-American freedom movement, but also the continental African freedom movement and the freedom movements of African people throughout the world, African community. So that term means that about all of us coming into consciousness of ourselves. Malcolm said, we must learn to think for ourselves, that we must have a logic of liberation. He said in a lecture at Harvard that the logic of the oppressed cannot be the logic of the oppressor if they want liberation. And I said that if we need a new language, a logic of liberation, we also need a language that informs that logic. And so what we want to do is develop a dignity affirming, life enhancing, and world preserving language that helps to free us from the way we thought under colonialism, under imperialism, under the Holocaust of enslavement. We have to break the catechism of impossibilities that the dominant society taught us and begin to think free, to think African, which is to think in dignity affirming, life enhancing, and world preserving ways that lead us on the upward path of our ancestors. And so, but what happens is we live in a context of unfreedom and oppression. And so we must be ourselves in order to free ourselves, but we can only fully be ourselves if we fully free ourselves. That is, create the conditions for our recognizing ourselves, developing ourselves, and coming into the fullness of ourselves, realizing our internal potential and capacity. Now, we live in a context of oppression and resistance, and that oppression has three aspects to it: domination, deprivation, and degradation. The domination is conquest and constant violence. Even when the political flag is handed to the countries of Africa, there's still the violence of imperialism, what Nkrumah called neocolonialism. There's still the intervention of the corporations and the countries that want African resources. It's the same with us. Even though there are laws against racist treatment, nevertheless, we're shot down in the streets and we have to constantly resist police violence all the time. But there's systemic violence. That's domination. And domination always involves violence, physical violence and psychological violence, violence of other kind. Second, deprivation. Africa, as everyone knows, is the richest continent in the world, and yet the people are so impoverished. And Nkrumah noticed that, Nyerere noticed that. I should say, Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere all recognize that. All of our leaders recognize that. And so the question is, how do we get beyond that? How do we get an egalitarian distribution, an equitable distribution of wealth for the people who need it, to whom those resources belong? They don't belong to people who are setting up, shop in Africa. They belong to the African people, right? And so there's a struggle to end our deprivation, right? There's also a struggle to end our degradation. That's our humiliation by the Europeans, by racism. And when I talk about racism, I want you to know I make a distinction between racial prejudice, which is simply hatred and hostility directed against different others. And racism is being able to turn that hatred and hostility into public policy and socially sanctioned practice. And so racism is a systemic denial of a people's history, humanity, and right to freedom based exclusively or primarily on the false concept of race. Because race is not a real concept, it is a social construction, a socio-biological category invented by Europe to assign human worth and social status using Europeans as a paradigm, right? The closer you are to European, the higher your human worth and the higher your social status. And the further you're away from European, the lower your human worth and your status. That's why a lot of Black people bleach their skin. Not just Black people, but Asians, Native Americans, Latinos. They bleach their hair and change their hair, do other things, their nose, their eyes, right? Not because they like white, but because they don't want to be penalized for being different, okay? And so we're struggling on those three fronts, right? Against domination, against deprivation, which is artificial impoverishment. It's not like we don't have the resources, but our resources are being taken from us, not just on the African continent, but all over the world. That's why Pan-Africanism must be global, not simply continental, as Garvey taught, if you remember, and also Nkrumah also taught this, that we need a global Pan-Africanism as well as a continental one. And then,
so let me ask you here, this the coming into the fullness of ourselves, or the struggle for self-determination. One side of it is dealing with the external forces that led to the domination and deprivation and degradation that we're talking about. But the other side of it is the need, in order to get to the fullness of ourselves, we need to look within, right? We need to engage in this kind of introspective process and understand the internal forces that we have to grapple with in order to be free, in order to become free in the struggle for self-determination, and get to the fullness of who we are. What are your thoughts on that? Because if we focus just on the external factors, then we're constantly externalizing the process or the problem. But there is that need also to look within, within ourselves individually, but also within our communities, to see what is it that we need to change about who we are, or how interacting with ourselves and the environment that we live in.
Yes, appreciate what you said, if I understand correctly. I didn't mean to overstress the struggle to free ourselves as an outward process, right? I believe that it is inward and outward, right? I believe that that if we're going to be ourselves, that we must understand the best of our culture, and we must return ourselves to that. That, you know, like take for example, vulgar individualism and social Darwinism we learned from the Europeans. We don't need to do that. We need to ask, what is the best of our communal practices? Doesn't mean I believe that everything we as Africans did anciently or now are right. Of course, that's not so, right? Not only did we have problems before the European came, right? They were aggravated and manipulated when the European did come. And so I really want us to understand that here's my position, right? I believe that the fundamental issue is our culture grounding. I believe that the defining feature of any people or nation is its culture. And that for a people to be itself and free itself, it must be self-conscious, self-determinate, and rooted in the best of its culture. Not all of its, the best of its culture. And third, and this speaks to it's about internal, I believe that the quality of life and the success of a people's liberation struggle depends upon it waging cultural revolution within and political revolution without, resulting in a radical transformation of self, society, and the world. So it's a dual struggle at the same time, an inward and outward one. That's what I said, because if we don't be ourselves, that is be fully African, right? In the best sense, not just African by color, but African by culture and self-conscious practice that reflects who we really are, right? And that's why, like even on Kwanzaa, we ask people to sit down on the day of meditation, January 1st, and measure themselves in the mirror of the best of their culture and ask themselves 3 questions. Who am I? Am I really who I am? And am I all I ought to be? Who am I in history? Not who you are on your license or something like that, but who are you in history and culture, right? And second, am I really who I am? Fanon said, we often wear the mask. We disguise ourselves. We do less for ourselves than we should, right? We're not always just to ourselves. Sometimes we're greatly unjust to ourselves, right? We have to face that. And third, the question is, am I all I ought to be? Given what my identity is, right? Given what my people need, what we need for this hour, am I all I ought to be, right? And if we measure ourselves by that, who am I? Am I really who I am? Am I all I ought to be? Then I think we can go forward. But we must always question ourselves as we question society. And we must bring forth our best ideas and practices, especially toward each other. You know, if you look at the internecine struggles that we have, right, that means that we're not following the kind of process and practices that represent the best of what it means to be African. In all our societies, all African societies, peace is a virtue. In fact, in ancient Egyptian texts, it says about peace, exceedingly good is the presence of peace. And there is no blame in peace for those who practice it. So we have to do the work of peace among ourselves so that we can stand in unity to struggle against those who would impose their system of oppression on us. So that's very important. And thanks for that question, because I really want us to see it's always a dual struggle, inward and outward.
Right, right, very good. So let me ask you then, when you created Kwanzaa in the 1960s, I'm not sure, if did you know that it was going to be a global holiday festival that was going to be observed, celebrated in different parts of the world? That's one part of the question. So it was basically, are you happy with how Kwanzaa is being celebrated? Is this what you had envisioned when you introduced it in the 1960s? And how are we doing as a people? How are we doing as a people in general in terms of representing the best of who we are?
Mm-hmm. Appreciate what you've asked, Divine saying correctly. Yes. Let's start with the first question. This is the first question, did I know it would grow? Well, of course, I'm not a prophet, but I believe that if I could create something of value that speaks to the best of what it means to be African and human, that our people would embrace it, that they would use it to ground themselves, orient themselves, and direct their life toward good and expansive end. Because I created Kwanzaa as a result of developing my philosophy called Kawaida. And this is my philosophy, Kawaida, out of which I created both Kwanzaa and the Nguzo Saba. I created the Nguzo Saba first, then I created Kwanzaa. And I created Kwanzaa as an instrument to in fact introduce and reaffirm the importance of the 7 principles, the Nguzo Saba, and other communitarian African values, right? And so it was very important for me to see Black people recognize and re-embrace the best of what it means to be African and human in the world. That's called Sankofa. Of course, now we call it Sankofa, reaching back and retrieving the best of what it means to be African and human, and using that to build our lives, to anchor our lives, and to push our lives forward. So I'm happy with how it developed. I mean, I was just last year, I was collecting things from last year, and I'm seeing how Kwanzaa has spread around the world, and it becomes a fundamental site for people to develop practical programs in South Africa, in Barbados, in all the way up in northern Inuit land, Nunavut. I think I have it, and near Greenland, and just to see the Black people there, celebrating Kwanzaa, developing programs, right? Cooperative programs, because Kwanzaa stresses our cooperation. One of the most important things you notice about it, again, is communitarian value. The first value is umoja, unity, to strive for unity in the family, community, nation, and race, and ultimately the world. But we must, in fact, always start inward again, right? And we have to build that unity Kujichagulia. What does that mean? To define ourselves, to name ourselves, to create for ourselves, and to speak for ourselves, right? And then Ujima. Ujima means, you know, to build together the world we want and deserve to live in, right? To strive to build and develop our community together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and to solve them together. But especially to build the good communities, the good world we all want and deserve to live in. We must cooperate. We cannot think about just being over there. We must think about this. And you know, I'm very concerned about Africans. I studied a lot of African languages, and I was looking at the transformation of African language. Say, for example, in Swahili, you know, we say in the early days, we used to say, I'm going home. We would say, I'm going to our place, even if I lived alone in the city. But now we say Kwangu, which is, I'm going to my place, right? And the more that sneaks in there, and say, even in Zulu, I mean, people used to say, Sanibona, I see y'all, you know, I see all of you. Now, most times people say Sawubona, and the grammar books teach it that way, right? And so I always say, you know, Sanibona, because I want people to know I'm still following. And I always follow that up with, Sisabelandela, which means I'm still following them. I'm still following the ancestors. How are you? I'm good. I'm still following the ancestors, right? So I'm following the best of our culture. And that's important to me. And that should be important to all Africans everywhere on the continent and in the diaspora.
Wow, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for creating Kwanzaa for us. It's the only holiday that we celebrate to contemplate and embody, hopefully, those principles that you outlined, the 7 principles. That's really, it's very instrumental and very useful for our transformative process. But I think you want to add something. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I was saying that I just wanted that, and I wouldn't just say that, how pleased I am that Black people are preserving the integrity of the holiday and how they use it to build their families and to build community and to build cooperatives and to build political projects, you know. And this is in all the places where it's celebrated. As I said, on every continent in the world, we get email and photos and correspondence from people in Africa, in different countries in Africa, in South America, in Asia, in Europe. It's just beautiful to see Black people come together on this week and reaffirm the beauty and sacredness and obligation. There's an obligation in being African. That's important. And we need to stress that more often.
Absolutely. No, that's also very critical. But before we close, I'd like to ask you, Dr. Karenga, if you would send a special message to our people here at the Africa Unbound Museum and our young people, dynamic young people across the continent who will be watching this. If you want to send a message, a word of advice, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Kwanzaa's fundamental message is building family, community, and culture. It is to all ages, but inside that is a special message for young people. Frantz Fanon, one of the great thinkers, African thinkers of the 20th century, said that each generation must discover its mission, and having discovered its mission, either fulfill it or betray it.
Yes.
But how do we discover our mission? Mary McLeod Bethune says it is up to our older people to reaffirm the beauty and goodness of our youth, to never squash their zeal, to cultivate them. And we say, yes, we have to cultivate the best in our young people, but in the final analysis, they must choose good. They can be either our future or our fate. If they turn their back on their Africanness, right? If they refuse to represent and live the best of what it means to be African, that's the end of us. That's our fate. But if they do what Malcolm said, prepare for the future, using the best of our culture as African people, then they are a beautiful future and promise for us. The Odu Ifa, the sacred text of our ancestors in the Yoruba, says, when it becomes your turn to take responsibility for the youth, for the world, be good to the world. Do good for the world. That's my message to the young people. When it becomes your responsibility, when it becomes your turn to take responsibility for the world, do good for the world. Seek and speak truth. Do and demand justice. Build the good world we all want and deserve to live in. And I think it's important, Malcolm, the Minister Malcolm X said, the future belongs to those who prepare for it. So prepare for the future. At the same time, stay rooted in the past and also be concerned about the present. We say this is our duty, to know our past and honor it, to engage our present and improve it, and to imagine a whole new future and to forge it in the most ethical, effective, and expansive way. And this too, young people, you have an obligation to repair, renew, and remake the world, making it more beautiful and beneficial than you inherited. So continue the struggle, keep the faith, hold the line, love and respect our people and each other, seek and speak truth, do and demand justice, be constantly concerned with the well-being of the world and all in it, and dare help rebuild the overarching movement that prefigures and makes possible the good world we all want and deserve to live in and to leave as a legacy worthy of the name and history African.
Ooh, amen to that.
Well, Hotel, I say.
So powerfully and beautifully said. And I want to end on that very high note. Dr. Karenga, I am so very grateful. Thank you so much for
glad to do that. Let's keep in touch, okay?
Absolutely. We'll definitely keep in touch.
All right.